latest version is a little shorter.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. William Williams, and the chairperson of the Warrant and Finance Committee, and this is our fourth meeting of this fiscal year, and today is Wednesday, the 18th of October, 2017. The first thing we're going to do is to look at the minutes of the next to last meeting, which was prepared by Ms. Misha. Ms. Misha, do you want to just talk about this for a second?
Well, primarily I sent them all to everybody online, so you all should have had a chance to look at it, correct them or add to it. Basically, it talks about what we've done at the last meeting. There's two questions that like Virginia had and so on and so forth. And we have to guess and talk about Dick Neal when he was asked a few certain questions about coal and stuff like that. Most of it ran around Tom's information. The other thing is that Jen wants the Freedom of Information Act signed and back.
Jen wants what?
People who have not submitted their Freedom of Information forms
That was on my agenda, yes.
need to do so.
Yes,
I'm guilty.
Back to her.
okay.
I did, I turned mine in this week,
Okay.
last week.
So basically, it was, most of the discussion was based on the presentation of the data that we are going to talk about tonight. But there shouldn't be any other controversial issues for that second meeting. If I can hear a motion to accept the minutes.
Motion to accept the minutes as written.
As written, is there a second to that motion?
Second,
I'll second.
Okay, is there any other discussion on it? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
All against? They're approved.
I'll abstain.
Okay. Now, the third meeting was not televised, unfortunately. It was a meeting called at the behest of the Board of Selectmen because of the warrant that was submitted for a new employee with the CEO. And so basically there was a discussion about terminology in terms of whether it was an assistant CEO or a deputy. There were questions about who would be the administrative head for that position. And then there was a question about the job description, since the job description that was presented to the committee was one where it was basically the same as the CEO position, with the exception of the planning committee, which is a part of Mr. Paul's job as well. And then at that point, it was felt that Mr. Paul was not able to come because he was taking some courses. And so at that point, it was the group's feeling that we would go ahead since it was needed, and Mr. Paul is running 10, 15 hours more than what he is supposed to work. And so someone is needed. We had two deputy CEOs already in place, but these were really not deputy CEOs in the sense that they worked here all the time. Those two gentlemen, one was an electrician who does house inspections for a living and helps Mr. Paul with electrical inspections, and very infrequently. The second CEO that we have already in place is the actual CEO of Shapley, and he covers for Mr. Paul when he's out of town or on vacation or something of that sort, and again, very, very infrequently, in return for which Mr. Paul covers him as Shapley's deputy CEO. So neither one of them were actually deputy CEOs. We went ahead and approved it as written, with the understanding that they needed to clarify both the administrative strata as to who this person would report to, number one, and number two, make sure we have a name, since a deputy is somebody in the English language who can take over the work of somebody above him or her, and an assistant is really almost anybody. And with the job description that said that the deputy must have work for all 14 certifications required by the state of Maine, this was exactly the same as the CEO, and therefore it was probably going to be a deputy. In the aftermath of that, they redid the job description to include the administrative coverage. It reports to the CEO. They kept the deputy title, and the requirements now as far as the certifications is a may have to have certain certifications rather than will have the following 14 certifications. So based on that, it was presented before the voters, and it was overwhelmingly accepted.
Can I question
Yeah.
question on that, Bill? Just to make sure that everybody's clear on this, basically, what has been decided is that a deputy then has the authority to sign, for instance, a building permit, also has the authority to inspect the site and grant an occupancy permit, and formally go through the procedures, whereas an assistant does not have those authorities. They're an assistant to somebody who is authorized to execute
Well, at least
actions
from a
of the town.
definition point of view,
Right.
a deputy should be
Right.
able to do that.
Right.
Now, in reality, right now, the two deputies that we have, one is a master electrician.
Right.
And he is used by Mr. Paul primarily in instances where they need to have an electrical inspection. But he's not certified in all 14, although he recently received 2 other certifications recently, which is why his salary was increased, I think, a couple of months back.
I'm aware of what Ken Paul's arrangements have been in the past, or the town's
Okay.
arrangements, when he's not there. I just wanted it clear what authorities a deputy has versus an assistant as we move forward. And what I'm understanding is the deputy then has all the authority of a regular.
If he is certified in
If
that.
he's certified, right.
If he's certified.
Okay.
And the problem was that in the original job description given to our committee, it was stated he will or she will receive the certifications. And now that it's been modified, it's may be asked to be certified in certain things. Okay?
And I think they also clarified that it could take them up to a year and a half.
Right. The certification process, if you're going to do all 14, would be taking as long as 2 years
Right.
to actually accomplish all 14 of them, because some of them are not
Right.
offered every single year.
There's some provision in the law to allow the town to hire somebody in that
That's
position
correct.
under the conditions
correct.
that they proceed.
So I think we did the right thing, and I think that the voters did the right thing, and hopefully now this person, if she or he is hired, will be of some assistance for our CEO. Yes, ma'am. You have a question?
Question I have is,
Yeah.
do you remember everybody that was there voted yes?
Yes.
Everyone who was there voted yes. It was unanimous.
There was
Okay,
no-
The only regulars that weren't there was Tom, myself, and Nancy, so it was all the other.
The 2 alternates voted yes.
Okay, and Sarah was there?
Yes.
And
I'm just making
yes,
sure.
no, that's correct, that's correct.
Tom
So-
and I and Nancy were the only 3 that were voters.
That's important because there's no film of it, so.
Right.
Was no what?
No film,
The
no
TV
no
people,
movie.
there was a cross-messaging thing, and the TV people didn't show up.
Oh.
Makes it difficult to do minutes. Sometimes we rely on the television. Okay, so we have the last meeting discussed, and again, at this point in time, I wanted to let everyone know that Mr. Gore has for many years been critical of some of the processes and some of the terms that are used by the town governments through multiple boards of selectmen because of legalities. I, for one, have not really understood all of them. If the voters remembered at the last annual town meeting, Mr. Gore was almost consistent in voting no on a certain number of things simply based on the fact that the terminology was incorrect. So he has been working for, well, since the spring, at least with us, in getting all the data together. And so what we have tried to do is to take all of his data, put it into one document, and we'll present that document to the group tonight. You've already had copies of what is called version 4.1, and those were sent out, and it gives an entire 10-page summary of all of the procedures and the terminology that involve us as a direct democracy local government in Maine. It starts out with contents, and then it talks about the appropriate and inappropriate processes, terms, and phraseology, specific definitions and examples of fund nomenclature, specific comments regarding the school department warrant critique, as well as number 5, recommendations to the Board of Selectmen based on this document and study by this committee. So I'm not sure, Mr. Gore, we're going to depend on you to lead this discussion this evening, at least to some degree. And we can go over each of the sections if you want to, and maybe you'd give the highlights for the audience, if you would.
Well, first of all, if it's all right with you, what I'd like to go through and bring everybody up to 4.2. If you have 4.1, there are just a few changes in 4.2 if you didn't have a chance to print that out.
Your email, I printed out, everybody has a copy, and I have one complete copy, which I sent to you, I think, by email.
Right.
That included all of those changes.
Okay, all right.
Okay?
The
But
changes that were made
we
are...
truly need to vote on that, those changes, because all they have seen is the one without those changes from today.
Okay, so let me quickly go through those. On page 2 that you have, in the paragraph that begins to appropriate, I suggested to Dr. Williams, who's been honchoing this job of putting all these papers together, that we move a statement to the beginning of that paragraph. And the statement that has been moved to the beginning of that paragraph is, and I quote, "By statute, the Board of Selectmen constitute the municipal officers. All other elected or appointed positions are officials." Are officials. Okay, and we insert that after
The title.
after the title, which is appropriate and inappropriate processes, terms, and phraseology, and before paragraph number 1, which describes what to appropriate means. Okay, that statement was taken out of page 3, I believe.
Yes, 3.
And moved to that location. So it didn't seem to be, okay. More on page 2, on page 2, where in paragraph 1 that starts to appropriate, if you look, I think, at the second line in version 4.1, to is understood appears twice in a row. It's just redundant there.
Oh.
And all we did was strike one of those, is understood.
Correct.
Okay? Moving on to page 3. In paragraph 4, the second paragraph in paragraph 4 is restated in the third paragraph, or in the fourth paragraph. So, the third paragraph there is deleted. It begins, "The terms to raise applies," and ends, the deletion ends with, "grant such authority," because the same paragraph appears in paragraph 4 under section 4 on page 3.
So it was a redundancy.
Right, it was
And
redundancy.
so basically,
So,
that
right,
paragraph was
it
deleted,
is struck, right.
and the one following it was brought up.
Right, and by statute was the one that we just moved up to the
Yes.
beginning of, on page 2.
Yes.
And then the only other change from 4.1 is on page 4, paragraph 6.
I don't have a 4. Oh, wait a
I
minute.
think you do. In paragraph 6, where it says separate by a number of days, this is describing the 2 meetings, okay.
It's the second paragraph on the top of page 4.
6th, under the annual town meeting.
Right.
Yes, under annual town meetings.
And the second
Paragraph
one
6.
starts, "in recent times."
If you look at the paragraph that ends in the word June,
Oh, all right,
okay?
And I suggested to Dr. Williams that we insert in the portion of that statement that says separated by a number of days, that we insert the term adjournment. So it now reads separated by an adjournment of a number of days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and those are the only changes from 4.1. Those are the 4 changes.
So it was really very minor
Right.
changes.
And they're all editorial things.
Basically, yes.
There's no substantive change.
No substantive changes at all. Where is that,
I'm not seeing these.
where is that on that last one? What
Okay,
paragraph
let
is
me go back and find it.
We added the word adjournment. Oh, I see it, the last paragraph. Or session separated by an adjournment of a number of days. One part for candidate elections for Board of Selectmen and other committee members or
This one?
officials. Okay.
I don't know.
I don't get.
Separated by
Where are you inserting?
This is the 4.2 copy. Look at it. It's the last,
Separated
it's
by
the
a
last
number
paragraph
of
there.
days.
Separated.
by
and we
adjournment
ins-
by a
right,
number of days.
Inserted the term adjournment in there,
And that's all.
right.
Recent times, yes. Da, 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 da.
Right up above that, adjournment. You see the word adjournment in there, in that paragraph? Should be there. Yes. That was added. It was just makes it, adjournment is truly the legal term that happens. We have the secret ballot first on Tuesday, then the meeting is adjourned until the following Saturday when we have the
Right.
open
Floor.
town meeting.
So those are the only changes that are made from the version that Dr. Williams sent out on Monday.
It's not on the 4.1, it's only on the 4.2. I did that with Tom today.
Where you actually stuck it in the full point.
It was just an addition of the word adjournment of.
Where it says separated by a number of days in that paragraph.
Separated by an
Number of days.
adjournment.
Right, it now reads separated by an adjournment of a number of
Of a
days.
number of days.
Wait a minute. Wrong paragraph.
Oh, okay,
About halfway down,
that's why.
down here.
Okay, so we're not in the same program.
You see that now?
Well, we will in just a few.
Okay.
That's the second.
Now, I will go ahead and, depending on how we do going through this, Tom, I do think it'd be nice just to go through it and let people out on the television know what's basically we're talking about, if that's okay with
Well,
you.
that's fine with me. Why don't you've drafted this.
Okay.
I did the 4 reports, and this
Okay.
is a statement by the committee. If I hear anything that I have a problem with, I will, needless to say, pipe up, but I would prefer not to.
Okay,
I've
okay,
talked enough on this issue.
okay.
We're inserting the word adjournment.
Adjournment, yes, okay. And if I can have that paper
No,
back,
not
I'll go
yet.
ahead and start, not yet, okay. Again, we're going to go through each of these very quickly so that the town will have some idea of what was done. As I said, Mr. Gore has talked about this for a long time. We're very, very pleased that he had pulled all the data from the main statutes, et cetera, and allowed us to go ahead and sort of combine it into one document. Okay?
I'm good.
So we're going to go ahead and start with those changes that you've talked about just now. First of all, we talk about origin and establishment and the fact that we are an extremely lucky part of North America because we still have local government where the legal authority is in fact already given by the state. And unlike most of the other 49 states where the state gives the towns and cities and counties specific government, it's almost the other way around in the state of Maine. And it's something that we should cherish. We talk about an act and the source of authority for municipal officers, officials, boards, and commissions to act for the corporate body or in the name of the town of Acton is either a state statute. Town clerk acts as the agent for the Maine Secretary of State. The fire chief acts as the agent for the state electrical examiners board and the state fire marshal's office. And the local code enforcement officer acts as the agent for the Maine Department of Environmental Protection or the Plumbers Examining Board. And the local school committee members act as agents for the Maine State Board of Education. And then the town meeting grants an authority by acting for or against any specific requests for authority in the form of articles on the town meeting warrants. So this just gives sort of an overall history of it and to show that the town has a great deal of independence compared to cities and towns in all the other 49 states. And through the centuries, though, some of the terminology has sort of wavered or changed. And again, I'm thankful for Mr. Gore to be able to bring us back to some purity in terms of the wording that we should be using for some of these various items. So the second part of this is appropriate and inappropriate processes, terms, and phraseology. At this point, we go ahead and define to appropriate or appropriate and discuss that, realizing that deficit spending and non-authorized spending are prohibited. The only exception to this is a state statute which allows emergency financial overages in winter road maintenance funding without the approval of a town meeting. In other cases, the town meeting is the sole grantor of authority. The second word is to carry. And this is understood to mean a transfer of an account fund balance from the end of one fiscal year into the same account the following fiscal year. And again, the vote of the town meeting is required to appropriate the carried funds into the new fiscal year. Funds cannot be appropriated and transferred for use in the new fiscal year simply by order of the Board of Selectmen. The third is to encumber, or the noun encumbrance, which is understood to mean incurring a financial or a contractual obligation. No individual in the town executive, which is the Board of Select Persons, officer or official, may encumber the town legislative body, the town meeting, without prior voter approval at a town meeting. The fourth word is to raise or raise. It's an acceptable term authorizing the town officers, the Board of Selectmen, to use the power to levy real and personal property taxes in order to acquire the funds necessary to pay the municipal obligations within the planned fiscal year. The authorization expires at the end of the fiscal year. The town meeting is the sole grantor of this authority. The term to raise applies only to the securing of municipal revenue from real and personal property taxes. This revenue stream is unique in that municipal officers are granted the authority to establish a property tax rate sufficient to supplement other sources of revenue. Other sources of revenue include, and then we list them, excise taxes, taxes paid to the town to register cars, boats, snowmobiles, etc. That rate is set by state statute. B, state and federal subsidies and reimbursements, and we go through a whole list of those. And C, gifts and grants, donations that are not raised, but rather they must be, quote, officially accepted by the municipal legislative body, meaning the town voters. The key word here is accepted. In addition, an article to accept a gift or a grant should contain any and all provisions governing the use of the gift, grant, or donation and the conditions under which the gift or grant would be forfeited. The next word is expend, or the noun expenditure, which is the same as disperse or disbursement, is the act of the town treasurer to release monies upon presentation of a warrant to do so, which is duly signed and authorized by the Board of Selectmen. The next word, or words, is the annual town meeting, which is understood to be the required conclave or get-together of the municipal or town legislative body, that is, the voters, consisting of all registered voters wishing to participate in approving appropriations for the following fiscal year. By statute, the annual town meeting is defined as the meeting at which municipal officers and officials are elected. Now, in recent times, voting on appropriations for the following fiscal year have been conducted with two town meetings, a special town meeting for education and an annual town meeting for the funding of all other municipal services. The first of these meetings is a special town meeting to fund public education, and that usually occurs in the month of May. Funding of municipal services other than education is voted on at the annual town meeting held thereafter, usually in June. Now, all special town meetings to fund public education, it's been understood to fund education for the upcoming new fiscal year and accepted by longtime residents as such. That assumption, however, has never been stated in the warrant or in individual articles, and thus there's often confusion on the part of new residents to the town. In addition, and very importantly, is the fact that since warrants for a special town meeting are understood to grant an authority only for the duration of that fiscal year in which the meeting occurs, there is legal basis for questioning the duration of the authority granted by the special town meeting into the next and future fiscal years. Do you want to make a comment about that, Tom?
No, not really. I just think that, we should make it clear at that special town meeting, because it is a special town meeting, that what we're doing is we're raising the funds for the subsequent fiscal year at that town meeting, that those appropriations take place for that purpose.
Now, as I said, in recent times, the Acton Town Annual Meeting follows the May Special Town Meeting, usually in the month of June, just before the beginning of a new fiscal year, in 2 sessions, separated by an adjournment. So we have one part for candidate elections for Board of Selectmen and other committee members or officials stipulated. This is carried out usually on a Tuesday by secret ballot. The second part, or the second session of the annual meeting, is scheduled for municipal spending, not including the school committee and all other business, and it's held in an open voting membership meeting by the town voters. The next word that was defined is ordinance, meaning a municipal law as set forth in the revised statutes of the state. Such laws must be adopted by the town meeting after public hearings are held for educational and discussion dialogue by all interested voters. Usually ordinances are drafted by a committee of the town meeting to be considered at the annual town meeting. A special or emergency town meeting can be called by the Board of Selectmen if the issue is felt to be so important that it should be decided by a special meeting of the municipal body, legislative body, and cannot be postponed until the annual town meeting in June. Likewise, a special town meeting can be convened through the option of a legally obtained voter petition requesting a special meeting of the town Board of Selectmen. I'm sorry, a special meeting of the town voters at a meeting. Any potential ordinance may not be amended from the floor in a town meeting. In other words, it's up or down. You either approve it or you say no. A duly adopted ordinance is enduring. It endures past the expiration of the fiscal year in which it was enacted until or unless it's amended or appealed by the town meeting system. The next word for definition was the town meeting warrant. It's a public notice that an authorization or a vote of the town meeting is required in order to confer authority. Such a warrant must be signed by the municipal officers, the Board of Selectmen, or a notary public. The warrant must be publicly posted at least 7 days prior to the meeting date.
Where did they post that?
It's posted in a number of places in the town shopper.
They actually put one here, they put one down at the trading post.
The Acton Post
Post
Office,
Post office.
I mean,
There's 5 different places where they
the
put it.
Mills Post Office, did they still put one there?
You can actually go down, the warrant is delivered to the town cop, the town constable, and he actually has a warrant which tells him where to sign them, and he has to sign off on each one, and he returns that to the clerk. So if there's any question about whether it's been duly posted, but if you really want to know where it's been posted, that's the way you find out.
But there are at least 5
Yeah.
5 different places where they're posted. And one is in the town shopper as a newspaper.
No,
I mean,
no,
No?
the warrant, the warrant is the whole thing. It can be like 12 pages.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
it
just
goes
notice.
like a town meeting, they
Just
don't say
notice.
it's and such day, both school and the.
Right.
I think there's two postings outside and inside the town hall.
Yes,
Or at
that's
least
true. That's true.
There were, the bulletin board's gone, so.
Might be on that bulletin board in the hall now.
We
Could be.
can, we can find out from the town administrator. The ninth definition is article or warrant article. This is a specific request for a town meeting to grant an authority to execute some action not required by state statute. Most town meeting warrant articles are drafted solely by the municipal officers, the Board of Selectmen, to seek authority from the town meeting, the voters, to levy taxes in accordance with the provisions of statute, to authorize disbursement of municipal funds, enforce municipal ordinances, accept funds or goods for municipal purposes, establish statutory reserve accounts, and other authorities sought by municipal officers, which is not conferred by state statute. So unlike the case involving ordinances, the town meeting can accept, reject, or amend warrant articles on the floor of the town meeting. Amendments may include the reduction of the proposed appropriation, but not an increase of appropriation listed on the warrant article if the article contains a specific appropriation amount. A particular department, $1,000. You can agree with it, you can increase it, but you can't.
You can't increase
You could agree with it or reduce it, but you cannot increase it. That's correct. The exception to this can occur depending on the construction of the article wording. A proposed appropriation may be increased if the article does not contain a specific recommendation. For example, to see how much the town will give to la. In that instance there, then the amount is certainly can be discussed, and any amount that everyone comes up with a majority is acceptable. Is that a correct understanding of it?
You don't want to use the term, though, appropriate.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you. So historically, until the mid-1990s, appropriation articles were always written to see what sum the town will appropriate. And that gave the voters a chance to go up or down or have a conclave here to decide exactly how many dollars were going to be listed. The municipal officers in meetings with the Warrant and Finance would agree on an amount, and that amount would be recommended in the Warrant and Finance recommendation. The warrant contained no specific recommendation by the selectmen. The town meeting was free to set the appropriation at any level it chose. In the mid-1990s, the Board of Selectmen, in an effort to limit school department spending, began inserting a recommended amount into the articles, thus limiting the power of other municipal officials, the Warrant and Finance Committee, and the town meeting to influence the setting of priorities and spendings. So if there is a number, all you can do is agree to it or reduce it. If it's listed as we used to do the articles and say how much would you like to vote on, then it's open season and the town meeting can decide the number. On a written petition of a number of voters, you can, if you get at least 10% of the number of votes cast in the town at the last gubernatorial election, but in no case less than 10, the municipal officers shall either insert a particular article in the next warrant issued, or shall within 60 days call a special town meeting for its consideration. If select persons unreasonably refuse to call a town meeting, a notary public may call a meeting on the written petition requiring signatures as mentioned above. The municipal officers, select persons, as custodians of all municipal funds, are solely, personally, and legally responsible for any misappropriations, whether intentional or unintentional. And thus, the warrant is construed to be the sole legal document authorizing and requesting the municipal officers to instruct the town treasurer to expend or disperse municipal funds. The next word is to expend or expenditure. I think it's important here that except when referring to an act of the town treasurer, to allocate, allocation is to pay out or pay off, savings account are all considered to be generic terms with nebulous, ill-defined meanings, and the use of these terms should be discouraged in favor of the legal and original terminology mentioned above in the pages above us. The last word is legal. Any action taken by a municipal officer, official, board, or committee is legal, provided it does not violate state statute. The fact that an action may be legal or considered to be legal, however, does not confer authority to take that action. Thus, a town official, officer, board, commission, committee, or official, there's a redundancy there, may take an action which is legal according to tradition or legal opinion without the necessary authority to take action. If such occurs, the officer, official, board, commission, or committee is itself solely responsible for that action and may not be protected by the provisions of town sovereign immunity under the Maine Constitution. So, in that case, no department, town agency, or member thereof may encumber the town without the necessary authority to do it. So, then we have specific definitions and exemptions for fund nomenclature.
Examples.
And yes, the first is the general fund, and that represents the total of all monies authorized by town meetings, including outside funding such as grants, federal or state monies. It can be divided into designated funds and undesignated funds. Now, undesignated funds can also be considered as unassigned funds. It is the balance of the spendable monies in the general fund that's not contained in other classifications. It's commonly referred to as the undesignated fund balance. So therefore, undesignated funds is the same as unassigned funds, which is the same as undesignated fund balance. They're all synonyms of each other.
And they can be rolled over every year.
On a vote of the town meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Designated funds can be divided into 6 categories. Restricted funds, restricted statutory reserve funds. Committed funds, committed statutory reserve funds. Assigned funds, and assigned statutory reserve funds. Now, restricted funds are monies that can only be spent for a specific purpose as stipulated in the state constitution, and monies from external source providers such as donations, private grants, crowdfunding, etc. Or monies received through enabling legislation, for example, state or federal funds given to the town for spending restricted to state or federal special projects. The key to defining this category of funds for our purposes is that the town meeting has very limited authority to determine how funds will be spent, these kinds. These funds may never lapse into the undesignated fund balance, and they must be carried or forfeited. They must be appropriated and spent for the purposes defined by the body providing the funds, or the funds must be forfeited. All other categories of funds may lapse into the undesignated fund balance or be actively carried at the end of the fiscal year into the next fiscal year. All the other categories. Committed funds include amounts that can be used only for specific purposes determined by a formal action of the town meeting. The money cannot be so designated solely by the Board of Selectmen. Assigned funds is a catch-all designation referring to monies whose purposes do not meet the criteria to be classified as the restricted or committed, that usually can be described as encumbered operating funds. The assigned funds are not, however, exempt from the requirement for an authorization of the town meeting in the form of an appropriation prior to being spent. This class of funds should always lapse into the undesignated fund balance at the end of the fiscal year.
So this would be
These are
any
operating
funds that you raise for a line item in the warrant.
Well,
Or
more
for a
specifically, I think
specific
what we're looking at is when we're looking at committed funds, we're saying we're going to purchase a fire truck, or we're going to build a building, or we have a contract, okay, with a fixed number on it. We incorporate that in. Those funds are committed. You're going to spend all those funds because that's what the contract requires. When you get to assigned funds, you're talking about funds that are for operations which you may or may not spend all of. For instance, road plowing. You don't know if you're
Right.
going to, and there may well be some
That's what
funds
I
at the
figured.
end of the year that lapse. So any place where you're talking operating funds, you're really talking assigned funds because they are not so specifically designated as to exactly what each of those funds are for. Whereas committed funds, you're committed to a certain specific
And
contractor.
the assigned funds will, at the end of the fiscal year, then any additional monies left over will go back into unassigned fund balance, right?
Well, they should, and they should simply for this reason. If you're going to try and construct a budget, the only way you know
Yes, yes.
how to construct a budget is how much has been spent in one year. And so you construct the budget for the next year based on that number. If you're carrying those funds, and sometimes that has happened over the past few years, then you end up with a situation where you go to town meeting, you're voting on an appropriation for an operation, whether it's road plowing or whatever. If you have also carried funds, you have no idea how much you're providing or is going to be available.
Right.
First of all, you don't know what the number is at town meeting because the audit hasn't been done. And secondly, you can add up and accumulate funds that way. Now, okay, enough said.
Okay. The last type of funds are statutory reserve funds, or called reserve funds. These were the latest ones established by the state in 1987 by a specific revised statute. The restricted, committed, and/or assigned funds can all be modified to become a statutory reserve fund if created in accordance with the state statute. The law created statutory reserve funds by appropriating money or by authorizing the transfer of unencumbered surplus funds at the end of any fiscal year for the following purposes or uses: a specific or type of capital improvement, financing the acquisition or reconstruction of a specific type of capital improvement, or a specific or type of capital equipment, financing the acquisition of a specific item or type of capital equipment. Or 3, credit reserve accounts, providing a reserve which may be applied in periods of financial emergency to assist in continuing its normal operation without increasing the tax rate. When the town meeting determines that a financial emergency does exist, it may order the withdrawal of the necessary amount from such a fund. The annual appropriation for this fund may not exceed 5% of the total current tax commitment.
Would our FEMA
Not
sort of
really.
thing,
No,
can you give an example? Have we ever done this?
Yes. Well, no, yes and no. We've been pretending that we've done it. But the point is that we haven't done it in accordance with the law, okay?
Well,
Let's
what did
just
we
give you an
pretend
example.
to do it for?
In this past year, and I hesitate to bring this up, but the selectmen asked us to get together, okay? And see if we would approve or say it was okay to buy a fire truck. They used what they called a reserve fund for that. All right, now, they've called a reserve fund, but nowhere is there the formation of a reserve fund, a statutory reserve fund.
Statutory reserve
Okay?
fund.
Now, what they did there was they paid for the fire truck out of that fund without a town meeting. Okay, and here, this is the problem. This is the whole issue with these with reserve funds, okay? If you label it reserve and you think or treat it as a statutory reserve, there are two things you don't have to do. Once that fund is created and the money's put in it, it never appears again on a warrant, and it can go on, it is enduring, it doesn't lapse, and the municipal officers can spend it at their will and at their pleasure. Okay, and this is what has been happening, and this is what the school department also did when they created those funds
Buckets.
to, right, the so-called buckets. You were there.
Okay. I recall for a number of years, we put aside a certain amount toward a fire truck
Right,
fund or whatever.
right.
which is sort of what we were trying to do, but it wasn't done correctly.
Well, not necessarily. It was okay to create a reserve. I don't have a problem with creating a reserve fund and maybe calling it that. We want to be careful about the terminology here. But the question then becomes how you use that fund, okay? Now, we discussed your last warrant that you signed as chairman of the board when I asked you specifically because the warrant said establish these reserve funds and put money in them. That's fine, okay? And that's perfectly legal. The point is what happens at the end of that year, whether you carry that or whether you don't, okay? And whether the municipal officers can spend that money without an order of the town meeting. Now, my understanding of what you told us at the meeting when we discussed this was that you were putting that money in on the assumption that at some point in time you'd buy a fire truck, but you also assumed that that money would be carried from year to year and that there would be an article on the warrant to purchase a fire truck, and that would be approved by the town meeting. The fact is that in some cases, the town has treated those reserve funds, labeled reserve funds, as statutory reserve funds, which means that they don't show up on the warrant, they're not carried, they disappear, okay? And the municipal officers have spent those funds without an authorization of the town meeting. Right.
So the difference between a statutory reserve fund and a non-statutory reserve fund is that the statutory reserve fund needs the authorization of a town meeting.
No.
No, it doesn't.
A non-statutory reserve
The
fund,
other
other way around.
Non-statutory,
Right,
okay,
right.
so the statutory reserve, you can just put aside and everybody knows what it's for, and.
Well, hopefully everybody knows what it's for.
Okay.
But it can, you put it in a spot and it's there, and the only place you will ever find an accounting for it is in the audit, okay?
And it wouldn't be listed as any fund being carried forward
No,
because it doesn't need that approval.
It doesn't need
It
that
does not.
approval, and it also doesn't need approval of the town meeting to spend, okay?
Okay.
And that's what's been happening, and that distinction has not been clear to the town meeting.
So basically what you're saying, Tom, is that if we are creating a statutory reserve fund for the purchase of a fire truck,
Yeah.
then it needs to be so stated in the article that requests the town to approve the creation of this statutory reserve fund, and having made the stipulation for the purchase of a fire truck, the only way that money can be spent is for the purchase of a fire truck. Otherwise, somebody's stealing.
I would suggest, yes, and I would suggest that it would be even more specific than that, because reading the legal terminology, specific is very definitely laid out. And the way I define specific is, I take 5 different people that are not talking to each other and ask them what that money is supposed to be for. If everybody can give me the same description, then we have a common understanding. That's what we mean by specific.
But it should probably be spelled out in an article. If
Yeah,
you're going to
yeah.
create a statutory reserve fund for the purchase of a fire truck
The language should be there.
or for the purchase of an ambulance,
Yep.
it should specify in the article that that is the only damn thing you're buying.
Yes.
You can't spend the money anywhere else.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Not only that, I would go further than that. I would say if you're going to put an article in the warrant for a specific, now this is specific, and review in your mind the way I defined specific a minute ago, I want to see a contract, and that's why I wouldn't vote for the ambulance, because I didn't see a contract. I had no idea what we were buying.
Well, then you should also buy an ambulance and equip it.
Yes.
There ought to be.
The wording should be in there, yes.
Yes.
When we voted to buy the ambulance, think about this for a minute. It was all this four-wheel drive, chains, all that stuff. Nobody even had the opportunity to ask the question, when was the last time we had an ambulance get stuck in the snow? We didn't even discuss that.
Had an ambulance,
Get stuck in the
the
oh,
You know, I mean, I may have been the last one who ever drove an ambulance in this town that got stuck in the snow, because I got stuck down on Langley Shores back around 1982, where I had no business being. But in fact, That's a relevant question. If you're
Right.
going to spend $100,000 extra for an ambulance with all this,
Bells and
But
whistles. Okay.
the point here is that when we create these funds, we should say in the article that's creating them that they are a statutory reserve fund, and we refer to the law so that everybody knows what's going on.
Okay, in that case, now you said that they shouldn't be created until you have a contract. If we're putting money away for a future fire truck.
Right.
You're certainly not going to have a contract
You're
for
not
it.
going to have, you're not going to have,
Or
you're not going to
even-
have the paperwork together to create a statutory reserve fund.
So
okay?
it will be
It will be an
a-
assigned
It'll,
fund.
It would be a unstatutory that you would vote for every year to carry, okay?
Okay.
It would be in the
All right.
warrant, all right?
Okay.
However, let me give you an example, for instance, of where a legitimate statutory reserve fund for capital equipment might be appropriate. Let's assume that we're going to build a building or an addition or something like that. That's going to be a multi-year project. Okay? We have a set of plans in front of us. Everybody agrees on what we're going to build. All right? Maybe we're not going to build it just this year. Maybe we're going to start it this year. Maybe we're going to start it right off. But whatever, it's going to be a multi-year project. Okay? Then it may be appropriate to establish a statutory fund, fund it because everybody agrees on what the specific item is that you're paying for ahead of time. Okay? And the contractor then is also assured that he doesn't have to wait till the next meeting, okay? The funds are committed and they can't be reconsidered by the town meeting at that point in time. So that may be a legitimate use for those types of funds.
And that would be considered a committed statutory reserve.
Yes.
okay.
Now, is there a warrant written indicating every year, this is the funds for the addition on whatever building?
There should be.
Okay.
Okay.
And so then the Warrant and Finance Committee would approve it every year? Is that correct?
If it's a non-statutory
Make
if it's
a
a non-statutory reserve fund,
Recommendation.
then it would always come back to Warrant and Finance every year.
Every
For
year.
a recommendation?
Right, and that's that part of the warrant where you have this list of funds, which we're gonna talk about more later on. But those funds get carried every year, and they may also be appropriated for expenditure in a future.
So there's language in the warrant that can easily be understood by anybody?
That's our objective.
Okay.
That's our objective. That's what we're trying to get to.
Okay, so we've talked about the types of statutory reserve funds as it pertains to a specific or type of capital improvement, a specific or type of capital equipment, credit reserve accounts, we've talked about a little bit. But as far as credit reserve accounts, those are the type of statutories providing a reserve which may be applied in periods of financial emergency to assist in continuing its normal operations without increasing the tax rate. But the town meeting must determine that a financial emergency exists.
This is the problem with most of those bucket funds. If you remember, most of those bucket funds, they were contingency funds, okay? They were to be spent to match some imagined, okay?
Emergency.
Not only that, but the article that created them authorized their appropriation,
Right.
okay? Which is contravenes state law, because
The town
the law specifically
town
says,
voter.
the law specifically says in order to spend those funds from that account, you have to have a vote of the town meeting declaring an emergency exists, okay? So not only do I have a problem with the funds having been created the way they were, I have a problem with how they're being executed because they're flying right in the face of the state law. And if you remember those school board meetings, I had a number of discussions with the superintendent about whether they were contingency funds or not contingency funds.
Right.
What they were. Do you remember that?
We had all sorts of
Okay.
terminology.
That was the item. That was the issue, right
So the
there.
credit reserve accounts, the annual appropriation for this purpose may not exceed 5% of the total current tax commitment. And the other use of this is paying for a funded debt, any assets remaining in such a statutory reserve account other than the town's own bonds shall be withdrawn from the account when the debt for the payment of which it was established has been refunded. Under such circumstances, the town meeting may then pledge the assets for payment of a new debt or may order the remaining assets transferred to another account.
And a
These-
use for that, excuse me.
Go ahead.
Just a use for that may be a situation where we don't have a reserve fund for a piece of capital or a piece of equipment, but it's something else. And a bank or somebody who's lending us money or who's contracting with the town for something may want to know that the town meeting does not have another chance to come back and decide we're not going to pay that bill after all and take those funds and go someplace else, okay?
Okay, so thus we have 4 designations of statutory reserve funds must be created and funded by the town meeting. Once created, these funds exist in perpetuity. Hence, these specific types of funds do not need to be carried in subsequent warrant articles. And thus, no appropriation by subsequent town meetings is required for the municipal officers, the Board of Select Persons, to authorize disbursement of funds, except in cases of those credit reserves that we talked about, in which the town voters, the town legislative branch, must decide if an emergency exists. The account and the funds within them never again appear on a warrant unless the town meeting authorizes additional appropriations for a particular statutory reserve fund account. So-called reserve accounts or reserve funds not created in accordance with the statutes are not truly statutory reserve accounts in the legal sense, and as such are not enduring into the next fiscal year. The use of the word reserve in such cases is therefore confusing and shouldn't be used. Strict use of these 6 types of designated fund titles should be utilized. Then there are 2 statutory references to limit such funds, notwithstanding any other law. The general operating fund balances at the end of a school administrative unit's fiscal year must be carried forward to meet the unit's needs in the next year over a period not to exceed 3 years. Tom, do you want to explain that a little bit?
Well, what the law, this is a reasonably new law, and it's just come into effect, and it is actually what caused the buckets to be created because the school had a relatively large unfunded balance. If you go back and read the law, what it says is that the school, if it has at the end of a fiscal year, if it has funds in excess, undesignated funds in excess of 3% of its budget, then it must return those funds either to the state or to the municipality. They can't carry, but the carried funds must be spent for schools, okay? There was a transition period in there, okay, which began in, I believe, ended in 2015 that said all those funds had to be spent.
Correct.
Okay.
2015.
We're getting into a little problem here in our handling of funds because if there's a beautiful paper trail there telling us what happened to those funds that got put into the buckets, okay? And legally, the town had 3 years to spend all those funds down. Well, the town didn't spend them down, they put them in the buckets, all right? So I don't know what the legal implications are, but there's a good reason why the state may want to come back and say, hey, you guys didn't do what you're supposed to do, we want some of our subsidy back. All right, so this is the flag I'm waving, I don't know.
So at least it appears to threaten Acton with penalties if funds are not managed in accordance with the statutes. Of note is the fact that a careful search through all the town warrants by Mr. Gore from 2008 to 2016 reveals that only one reserve account, the Acton Ambulance Reserve Account, was actually created in accordance with the statute for creating statutory reserve accounts.
I would also like to add that I believe Mr. Waterhouse also went through all those warrants, and I don't know if anybody else did or not, but am I right, Mr. Waterhouse, that you reviewed them all also?
That is correct, and they were all created on the town floor.
Yep, yep.
The next title is Special School Department Considerations. I'm going to limit that to just a little bit because we're getting short of time for the TV. Multiple designated reserve accounts have been created with evidence that these accounts did not meet the provisions of Title 30A and therefore were, by definition, not statutory reserve accounts. It would seem that there exists a clear paper trail to establish from whence these funds come, with the exception of the Fuel Statutory Reserve Fund. The continuance of such funds theoretically exposes the town government to a penalty that could result in reducing state subsidy for education. The 3-year labor contracts resulting from labor management negotiations in reality freezes movable line items within the contracts, such as inflation bonuses, medical insurance increases, etc. Those changeable items are presently enshrined in the contracts, which are in place for 3-year periods. We then have recommended actions, and this will be our recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Select Persons create a unified master list of designated funds. This list should be grouped primarily according to the type of fund and also in parentheses by the lay terminology, realizing that some lay terms may be inaccurate. These funds would be listed and grouped as restricted funds, restricted statutory reserve funds, committed statutory reserve funds, assigned funds, and assigned statutory reserve funds. This list should include a definition of the purpose or the use of the fund, as we talked about earlier, in addition to the complete identification of such funds among the 6 potential fund types listed above, using these correct labels. The second recommendation, for the statutory reserve funds as defined by main statute, the identifying warrant article establishing such an account should also be listed with such funds. The third recommendation, to identify the so-called reserve funds which do not comply with statutory reserve funds to be placed on the agenda for presentation at a town meeting, with monies in such misnamed funds being transferred to the town's undesignated fund or the school's undesignated fund. The fourth recommendation, work with the auditor to resolve conflicts arising from previously misclassified reserve funds as restricted funds, as mentioned on page 36 of the 30 June 2016 audit. Do you want to make a mention there, Tom?
I can if anybody's interested, but I have copies of the pages from the audit, if I can find them here. Let's just say that through, and I don't know what process the auditor used, when they listed restricted funds, they included the bucket funds from the school, okay? Those funds, the town meeting can abolish those at any point in time. The town meeting can act on those to do anything they want to, okay? So they are not restricted funds. Remembering your definition of restricted means the town has very limited opportunity to change what those funds can be used for. Okay, so the town meeting can do anything they want to with those funds, and you don't have that option with reserve funds.
The fifth recommendation, all future town meeting warrants should use the specific types of titles mentioned in the recommendation number 1. Recommendation number 6, all future warrant articles creating reserve accounts, if established, under main statutes Title 30A, should contain a reference to the statute. Number 7, all future town meeting warrant articles should be written using these terms mentioned in this general recommendation. Delete or omit terms that may be confused with the legal terms defined herein, albeit such action may be a title change from what is customarily used at the present time. Recommendation number 8, warrant articles should be written with working definitions of the article's purpose. The effect should be that the terminology used will assure that any municipal officer, official, or taxpayer will be able to identify the warrant article that appropriates funds for any major expense, that is, any expense $15,000 or over. Recommendation number 9, the Board of Select Persons should consider recommending a proposal to a town meeting that certain municipal officers and or officials be authorized to sign multi-year contracts which would encumber future town meetings. Such a proposal must be approved in a town meeting. Options for such a corrective move would include the following: require that all multi-year contracts contain provisions making them subject to the will of future encumbered town meetings. This contract, quote, is valid only after approval of the Acton legislative body, unquote. And/or in budgets and contracts created from multi-year contracts, only line item increases from the previous year's budget would be subject to town scrutiny. And/or all negotiation multi-year contracts, including labor contracts, are approved by a town meeting. And/or the face value of such a contract may be limited. And/or the term of the contract may be limited to 1 year only. And/or the specific purpose of the contract may be limited. In other words, because of the contracts, we're into a 3-year period, and in that 3-year period, the town really isn't able to do very much in terms of making any adjustments in this at all.
The town is, but you open
Well,
up a can of worms.
A can of worms, a large can of.
A large can, we're back to the
A
Indian
very
land.
large
we're-
worms.
We're back, Indian land claims time.
Okay, and then recommendation number 10, the article or warrants for the school town meeting should specifically state that the authorizations granted at the meeting are for the next fiscal year with the date specified, for example, for fiscal year 2018, 2019, for example.
Actually, let me clarify that a little bit, Bill, with
Please,
respect to
okay.
what the options are.
Okay.
In the event that, let's say, the school committee signs a 3-year contract, the first year is funded at the town meeting, the second year is not funded. In the event that the town refuses to fund that contract, okay, there's legally, the officials that signed the contract are legally bound to do that. They're obligated to pay the contract from that point on because they have acted without the authority. Now, in fact, what would happen is that's unlikely to be the case, but but that could happen. The other thing that could happen would be, and it would be up to a judge to decide, that the teachers union, if we're talking about a teacher contract here, could come back and through the legal process lien all the properties in town to recover the cost of that. So, or there might be a balance in between. It would be up to a judge at that point in time, and you don't really know where it's going to go. The point is, it needs to be cleaned up.
And remember also that at the present time, the budget is presented at a special town meeting in the month of May, which means that legally, all of those activities would be null and void by the 30th of June.
Which we could say happens with that ambulance fund too that we adopted. But we're not, what's done is done.
Please.
We're moving
Okay.
ahead.
So, number one, Mr. Gore has for years made complaints that many of us have not really been able to perceive carefully. I'm grateful to Mr. Gore for having obtained all of these data and helping to put this together for us as a committee. We have changed it. We've gone from version 1.0 to version 4.2, I think, at this stage of the game over the last month or two. And so my next question is, based on what has been read today, are there any other comments that this committee wants to make in terms of critique on this? As far as, I don't think this is right, I want to add something or anything of that sort, I'm open to anybody's voice. If not, I would like to hear
Make a motion.
motion
that
to
we
accept this document
Accept this document.
and to present this document to the
Present
Board
it
of,
to
the Board
Board of Selectmen for their pleasure.
for their
remembering-
for their consideration.
Pleasure, consideration, whatever you want to call it. Remembering, of course, that this is strictly a recommendation
That
by
is correct.
us. They can look at it, read it, make certain amounts of changes, should they so desire.
or make
Or they
paper
could throw
airplanes
it
with it.
in the trash can.
That's right.
I was gonna say, Ed, the last time we met, seemed to sound that this was something they were meeting for, that they were looking into having it done, only because it's been so long before the words have been so refreshed.
Totally understand. The only thing about it is, this is going to create
Headaches.
a lot of headaches and a lot of work for some people.
Well, I realized that this wasn't
you know,
gonna be done
it's not a,
until it
you
goes
know,
to June.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's-
not, you know, not that it doesn't need to be done, it certainly does, okay? If we're not doing things the way they should be done in a proper manner, in other words, if we're spending money and not specifying what we're spending the money for, and I'm talking specifics, okay, then, you know, let's just open up one big undesignated slush fund. No, that's the wrong way to operate, okay?
So we-
Technically, the town probably needs to go back to a line item budgeting process. But I know that that probably is not something that most of the powers to be would appreciate too much. It's a lot easier for people to say, I need $90,000 for my budget next year. Well, what do you need that $90,000 for? Give us some idea of what you're going to do with this money.
That's correct.
Okay? Don't just ask for, you know, that's like asking, you know, your mother for $1,000 and, you know, when she asks you why you want the money, you say, I'm not going to tell you, I just want the money. Guess what? She ain't going to give it to you. In any case, I make a motion that we accept this and.
Okay, can we have it read now, the motion that Mr. Waterhouse has made?
Motion that has been made is to present this to the board.
That we accept this document, and that we wish to present this officially to the Board of Selectmen for their consideration.
So moved.
Second.
It's seconded. Now, any.
Oh, I didn't mean to second that. I'm sorry. I was
That's okay.
staying out of this.
No,
Nancy,
that's
would-
I will second it.
Maybe you guys to Tom did stay.
I will second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion?
Call the vote.
I think that this really shows the voters that their power in the town meeting truly makes a difference, and that we need to make sure that they understand, and that really depends a great deal on the town voters to initiate or to watch over all of these funds.
I was gonna say, and the other thing, I hope the Board of Selectmen get it, they obviously are gonna take it and go through legal. That's gonna be probably their first step. I'm
Mhm.
hoping that they will go through it, make a decision, kind of let us know where the decision lies, and then turn around and have something on this June's warrant, because it's gotta be approved by the town in order to get the furnish, and I believe, right?
in order to get what in?
In other words, to get the right wording in, the town has to approve it as a warrant, don't they?
No, they don't have, no, they have to approve each individual article in the warrant. The selectmen are
So they don't
totally,
have to- the town doesn't have to approve what's being written, it's only the Board of Selectmen at this point.
The Board of
Yeah,
Selectmen
the
will
Board of Selectmen
give the
present
correct
the
title
warrant.
for each of these, okay? That's their
Are we
job.
and then they would come back to us
we have a motion
presumably, and we
Yeah,
would
we're
see
just
if we
discussing
agree or
it.
if we
Okay.
disagree. For instance, if they come back and say, well, you know, this is a statutory reserve fund, this is a statutory reserve fund, this is a statutory reserve fund, and we disagree with that, then we have several different options. We can try and work out those options with the Board of Selectmen, or we can simply vote no when it comes to a recommendation.
But again, the idea of using the right terms at this time now, we got 6 different types of funds, and that we should use these designations as the correct designations for the funds.
I would like to thank everybody for participating. I know this has been a lot of work. It's been a lot of work for us all. I think what's going to happen as a result of this is, in the past, it's been me voting no. One vote on Warrant and Finance doesn't raise a question. But when we come to voting in
Point of
next
order.
year, there's going to be more than one voting no, and that's when the town meeting will stand up. So we'll
Okay, we gotta
take
go back
notice.
to
Point
the
of order.
motion first.
Yeah, we have a
We have a
motion on the
motion,
floor, and
yes.
it's been
Seconded.
seconded. We've had discussion. Any further discussion on the?
Call the vote.
Okay, all in favor signify by a hand raising.
Unanimous.
All opposed? Unanimous. Okay, now, you wanted to say something else? Anyone?
Now he can say what he wants.
Okay.
I'm done. I think everybody understands.
Tom,
what the
I thank you
significance of this
again
is.
on behalf of the committee.
Well, I thank everybody
You
for
all-
going through this. This is not easy stuff to.
You all have helped with wordsmithing, but Tom's principles, I think, have stood the test, the acid test here, and hopefully that we'll be able to start cleaning up some of these terminologies for the voters in the future.
When's our
May I
next
hear,
No, the camera might have to go, but we need to know what's going on with the liaisons.
do Do we have anybody who has attended other meetings as a Warrant and Finance liaison person?
Of course you do, and you know that very well.
I have-
Mr. Williams.
I
Now,
have,
let's talk about the Board of Selectmen meetings.
the board, of-
I and you and Ms. Mishu have attended.
well, all I can say is that I was not present. I was in Canada when they decided they were going to have a limitation on the time for speaking.
Understand, and, you know.
Everyone's now allowed 120 seconds to.
Currently.
Currently.
It has been requested that they modify their procedure for holding their Board of Selectmen meeting to allow 3 minutes worth of talking
No, it
time.
was 2 minutes.
No.
Right.
I'm the one
Wants it
that
to
asked
be
them to
three.
change it.
But I mean, we're
But 3
talking,
minutes is nothing
we're
as
talking
well.
about a group of maybe 20 people maximal. It's not like we have an auditorium of 5,000 members and they're lined up to ask questions.
I understand
We're talking
that.
about 20 people who really want to participate in town government and who come here in summer and winter and could be doing something else much more pleasurable.
Should we discuss being cut off by selectmen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay?
I mean, if
mean, you know.
if you're working hard enough to come in and care about what's happening in the town, they should be grateful and care enough to listen. If you're slow to getting to your point, they have every right in the world to say, could you please reach your point? There's nothing wrong with that.
I agree totally with what you're saying.
I've
Okay.
been told I was to speed up what I need to say and not basically say.
So anyway,
So anyway, that was the major contention at the last meeting. The road committee, I've also been present in the audience for. The road committee right now is in the process of looking at bridges, at least 2 bridges, the Canal Bridge and the Hopper Road Bridge. And they're going to get the state and New Hampshire involved with that process. In addition to that, we had a meeting of the private road associations this past week, and we had representatives from about 9 or 10 of them who are very, very energetic, want to start participating in town government more, and are going to be organizing all of the town private road associations into one organization that would come before the town with proposals.
As a member of that committee, I would just like to express one concern with that meeting.
Yeah.
We heard from the road associations. What we did not hear from were the roads that don't have functioning associations. All those roads that spoke of. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, I'm sorry, yes. Lois, you were the only one, okay? And that concerned me. I was struck that all those road associations appeared to be acting very effectively. They had 95% participation. more or less.
Absolutely. I was
5%,
surprised
and
also.
Which was wonderful.
Yeah.
As far as I thought. But I'll save my comments for road.
Well, the last meeting, this meeting that was of the private road associations last past Wednesday, you were not present for, but they are planning on calling every single road association that's available, including ones that didn't show up at the other 2 meetings, and try to get them involved with this. And so they'll be coming back in the next 2 weeks with those identified. And that'll be a starter. I would agree, though, we need to get everybody who's involved with it.
And Mr. Gore, did you make it to the school meeting?
No, I did not. I didn't even know there were any. I have been, I was away on vacation, and I have been totally dedicated to this, Lois.
next one.
And of course, this room where you've got cemetery and forestry and conservation.
Correct.
Maintaining.
And please let me know when the next,
Website. I don't even know half
There's
the
a
time it's not
website?
way around here. You go to Acton
Town website.
oh, the town website.
Town website, they have
You've heard of
them
it.
listed. They have them all
Yes,
listed.
I have indeed.
And I have not made it.
How
to
often do I have to check that?
They only meet like about once a month. But
What,
you-
oh, once a month they meet?
Basically. the
Well, if
first
you would
and
like-
last
All right.
If you would like, Lois, you could email me, and I'd be more than happy
Well,
to
I think
post
you
it.
want to- You go to this town website, do your thing. And then, as I say, the forestry department met last night, so they've done their one next week after next, it's the last Thursday.
26th, I think.
26th or 28th.
Is it this coming Thursday? Oh, all right.
Oh, that one.
No,
that's the
27th.
26th.
Is it the 26th?
Yes, because I have an event at
I
work
will
that I'm
not
doing.
be in town that
All
night
right,
either.
But just to let you know, we're having ours the last Thursday of the month for now. And then
Thank you.
I have not made it to the rec or the planning. Problem is, they both meet the same night, same time.
And what time do you meet? At 5?
We meet at 5.
At 5?
Ms. Meehan,
Whereabouts?
Yes,
have you,
Here?
you were on the marijuana committee?
I am not on the committee. I was at the last committee meeting.
Okay, as a liaison, can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yes,
that's coming up
they
as
do
a-
not allow the public to speak,
Oh,
which bothers me. But they felt that they already knew what the public wanted, and they didn't really want to hear about it. They were trying to figure out basically that they are a gathering committee, so they are gathering information, and then as they put their information together, they bring it to the Board of Selectmen.
so there's been no information given
Well,
out
they made
to the public then?
Richard Nass the chair.
Yes?
There were 7 people on the board, or a committee, excuse me. And they all mentioned if they were pro or con. Do you want me to tell you how many are pro?
No,
or
no,
con?
that's fine. That's fine. No.
It lasted maybe an hour, and they're meeting again next Friday. They have to meet on Fridays it was a scheduling conflict with one of the people.
Okay.
And what is the purpose of this? This is a committee?
Yes.
This is
Ad
not
hoc
a.
sort of.
Well, it's not an
Fact-finding.
ad
It's a
hoc committee. It's
fact-finding,
It is
so-
a committee that was formed by the Board of Selectmen,
They were
and
not voted.
they are going to allow public input
Eventually, but
At a
right
public
now, they
hearing.
are
There's a public
not.
hearing
at a
scheduled,
public hearing.
which is scheduled soon,
The 24th,
24th.
yes. So that is the 24th, and they will be asking if the town wants to do a moratorium. And I will be putting out some information. There is the moratorium information right on the website where it says click here to read, and it's right on the front page of the website. So you can click there and read
Okay.
the moratorium.
Okay.
And then on November 28th will be a special town election in regards to voting for the moratorium, or voting down the moratorium.
And that would be secret
And that's going to be
ballot.
when?
November 28th,
Yeah, and that would be secret ballot.
Secret ballot.
That is a secret ballot.
8.
exactly.
Yes.
And they will be here from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on the 28th. On the 7th, we have the statewide election.
Referendum, right. yeah.
Just 2 referendums.
The only liaison we didn't get, and I didn't know if you wanted one, was for the library, because they also get town spending money.
No, we don't.
Yeah, but they're not a
They're
department
not a
of the town.
department of the town.
No, they're,
Okay, so I wasn't
And they're
sure
not
how
a
we
town
treated them,
committee.
if we treated
Yeah.
them or not.
I think it's incumbent upon anybody who's coming with a request to come and present that request to us here. And,
Because
so,
Okay.
Can I make a,
what about fire and rescue, Mr. Williams?
I have not been to a fire and rescue committee meeting yet. I'm sorry.
Just a little slow, I know the feeling, I don't know if it's the colder it gets, the slower I get.
we all,
It has nothing to do with temperature. It has to do with being unable to be in 2 places at the same
I
time.
know the feeling.
I was
There
swimming
have
last
only
week,
been very
Lois.
few people who've had that.
Fun.
That-
I'm hoping to get in one more
So
time.
I'm going to declare that we have been here for an hour and a half.
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Yes,
Yes.
because all in favor? Opposition? Remember Chairman Mao says 45 minutes is the maximum time that we should
Right.
spend in a meeting.
I like that.
In the red book.
Chairman,